Heard some pretty funny stories that I would like to spend the next hour talking about, but we can. David. He's still on drugs. All right, guys, so this week I was flipping through SportsCenter. I don't really have time to watch football games anymore, so this year, I mean, pretty much, really, I haven't watched any football games at all, which has been kind of new for me. But still, I like to go in and check out the scores, keep up with my team, see how they're doing. And it made me laugh this week because I thought back to when I was in high school. And when I was in high school, I lived, breathed, ate, slept football. That was it for me. That was what I lived for. I played football during football season, and then I refused to play any other sport because during that time I was going to be lifting weights and I was going to be practicing, getting ready for the next football season. And you know, Friday nights, right, before the game, those of you who've played high school football, you know how that is. Friday night lights, baby. You're out there under the lights. I had my Friday night rituals, which was I had a pair of lucky socks that I wore from my freshman year all the way through to my senior year when I graduated. The lucky socks, right? I would listen to death metal, rock music, and I would envision, you know, just these vicious hits where I would just decapitate people and take them completely out of the game, right? And just get all pumped up. And I go in the locker room and I'd be punching myself, and then my friends and I would punch each other and throw each other into the walls, and then our coach would get into it, and you know, he would pick up helmets and slam them against the wall, and sometimes shatter them, or he'd pick up trash cans and throw them across the room, and he'd get down in our face and shout obscenities at us and say, "This is what that other team's calling you right now, a blankety 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 blank. Are you going to let them talk to you about that?" And then we would shout back, "No, you know, they're a bunch of blankety blankety blankety," and you know. And we would do this, and this brouhaha and just this battle. And then, what do you think we did right before kickoff? Yep, the shouting stopped. We all got down on our knees, and we took off our helmets, and we said the Lord's Prayer. In cadence, perfect timing, we all had it memorized. Looking back at it now, I really don't know why we got down on our knees and took off our helmets. I don't know if that was some kind of a sign of respect for, you know, for God. But as I look back at that and I reflect on the prayer that we prayed that night, the prayer that Jesus taught his disciples, particularly for that evening, there's one verse that continually sticks out in my mind, and that is, "Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven." Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. You see, for us that night, when we would, or any of those Friday nights, whenever we would get down on our knees and say our prayers, I think at best that was just a ritual. I think at worst, it was us trying to, in some way, get God to bless us so that we could have a victory. But it wasn't about God's will, it was about our will. And I wonder if somebody had come into us before a Friday night game and said, "You know what? If you guys are willing to lose this game tonight, if it's the will of God for you guys to lose this game tonight, so that somewhere, somebody is going to come to Christ and know Him as their Lord and Savior, would you still say the prayer tonight before you go out and play this game?" I don't think we would have, because I don't think we were interested in God's will at all. It was all about our will. Now, my prayer life since then obviously has changed significantly, hopefully. However, if I'm completely honest, I would say that there are still times where I find myself in my prayer life where it is ritualistic. Sometimes I just flat out forget. There are other times where I find myself praying to God more about my will and less about seeking His will. And if I'm going to get really uncomfortable, which I'm going to get really uncomfortable tonight, and I expect you guys to do the same, And that is, there are areas in my life where I intentionally don't ask God about what His will is because I don't want to know. I'm afraid of what God may tell me. But let's switch gears here for a second. Have you guys ever come across somebody that you see them and it seems like they're always step by step, every step of their life, it's like they're just walking with God. You know, it just comes natural for them. And what I would call them, and what our current series that we're talking about, is in and through. And that is people who we constantly see God working in them, and then that's coming out through them and affecting the lives of other people around them. I can honestly say that I've been very blessed to have a lot of people around me who are in and through. And one way you can recognize an in and through person is because these are the people that either A, you want to be around them because you see something in them that you want to have. You see something in them that you feel like you're lacking. They have something that you don't have, so you start to tail them and try and figure out what that is. Or the opposite is you avoid them because you're scared to death that they might ask you a question like, where are you at with God? And then when you give an answer, they're going to realize maybe that you're missing an important element. So one way or the other, we either seek these people out or we avoid them because they either have something we want or they make us uncomfortable. But like I said, I've been very fortunate that God has placed a lot of in and through people in my life. Some of them still make me nervous, I'll be honest about that, when they ask me questions. But I've also learned a lot about prayer through them. And one of the first lessons I want to talk about tonight that I've learned about prayer from in and through people is, in and through people, when they pray about the big things and they seek God's will in the little things as well. And the way I learned about this initially, it's kind of a funny story, was we had this thing called the Harvest Festival a few years back. And basically what it was, and Woody, you can correct me on this, I don't know which one of us will have the worst memory here, but we had 48 hours of prayer leading up to this. And basically what this was going to be was a festival where we invited people from the community to come in so they could get exposed to Blue Ridge and interact with a lot of the people at the church and just get familiar with where we were. And we had 48 hours of prayer, and I remember the goal was that we were going to have somewhere between 1,000 and 1,500 people show up. But the only thing that we were going to do to get people to show up was word of mouth and this 48 hours of prayer. Now I can remember thinking, I own a business. This church is too cheap to advertise. This is stupid. Woody, I still love you. But this was early on in my walk, guys. But I remember thinking, seriously, I run a business. This is not going to work. Or just 1,000 people just don't show up because you pray. And so the day finally came, and I walked in there, and I remember at the time I was in the process of stalking Woody. I wanted him to be my big brother, so I just intentionally put myself everywhere that he was, and I followed him everywhere. And I watched him and asked him questions and just stalked him, basically. And but on that particular day, I think we ended up with, now you guys can correct me, I've heard anywhere from 4,000 to 6,000. We ended up having 6,000 people show up, right? And I remember as we're sitting there, and I'm looking out at this vast mass of thousands of people thinking, all we did was just pray for this. And I remember looking at Woody and saying, what's happening here? And then his response to me, I'll never forget, he looked at me and he said, well, next time we should probably only pray for 24 hours. But what that taught me was, in that moment, as I was standing at Blue Ridge, trying to figure out where we're going to park these people, what we're going to do with all these people, was that we seek God in prayer in the big things. The very next thing that happened was we ran out of food in like the first hour and a half, right? Because we were not prepared for this at all. And people came running up to Woody and they said, Woody, we're out of food. What are we going to do? And Woody said, let's pray. in my usual sarcastic tone, I said, yeah, maybe we can pass some baskets of fishes and bread around and see what's going to happen here. Open mouth, insert foot, because Woody wasn't joking. And so we went into a room and got on our faces on the floor, and Woody said, God, we've got several thousand people out there and no way to feed them, and we need you to help us here. And from there, some people went down to Sam's and bought like 3,000 hot dogs. They bought every hot dog Sam's had. People started showing up. Women started showing up in the kitchen and making these huge pots of chili. All these people just started showing up with food. And as I look back on it now, I realize that I might have been surprised by the amount of people that showed up there, but God wasn't. Amen. And as we sat there, and I remember what I did that day. This was my job, guys. My job was to scoop coleslaw onto hot dogs. That was my job for the day. So here's a guy who's always thought himself proud. I'm a doctor. I've got this successful business, blah, 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 blah. That was the happiest, most joyful I've ever felt that I can remember up to that point. And all I was doing was just scooping coleslaw on hot dogs. And every time that I would watch a hot dog go out into somebody's hands, or I would watch a bowl of chili go out into someone's hands, it hit me. God answers prayer in the little things as well. Another thing I've learned from people that are in and through is how God answers prayer. And this has kind of shown up in my own life as well. Whenever I pray to God, God usually gives me one of three answers. Yes, no, not right now. We all know the yes things, right? Those are the ones we really celebrate. We say a prayer for God for something amazing. It happens really quickly. Everyone jumps up, high fives, and says, do you see what God did? He's so awesome. That's when God says yes. No, when God says no. Sometimes we get frustrated. But what I've found is, as time goes by and I look back on it, at that particular moment in time, that wasn't the best thing for me. And typically, if I progress it out far enough, I start to see that God had something better for me. And for me, that's when God says no. And then there's another thing, whereas I pray for something and I don't see anything happen, and it either happens gradually or it happens at a later date, and all of a sudden I realize, hey, God answered that prayer that I prayed like a year ago, and I didn't even recognize it. And that's when God answers prayer and he says, not right now. But probably the biggest and most significant thing that these in and through people that I've observed in them, that they've showed me about what it is about prayer, their prayer life with God, is when they approach God in prayer, it is very much with a God, your will be done type attitude. And this is where God has me right now, guys. This is what I'm working through right now. Because what I've found is God is not in the habit of giving us advice. God is not in the habit of giving us his opinion. That is, when I come to God and I ask him for something, but I'm not willing to follow through on whatever the answer is, he's not going to give me an answer.